The light came without warning. In 12 minutes, every child between the ages of 5 and 15 vanished from Earth. Not in a traditional sense. There were no footprints leading away from suddenly empty desks. No doors left ajar. No security footage of masked abductors. Instead, 17 billion children simply dissolved into streams of golden particles that spiraled upward and disappeared. At New Horizon International Academy in Singapore, Lin Nguyen had been mid-sentence, explaining the concept of quantum entanglement to her 9th grade science class when it happened. One moment, 23 adolescent faces stared back at her with varying degrees of interest. The next, 23 empty chairs in a classroom that suddenly felt cavernous. The year was 2049, nearly half a century into what historians called the post-AI stability era. Humanity had survived the great technological revolution. The climate had stabilized, wars had decreased, and most diseases had been conquered. But something else had been lost. Innovation had slowed to a crawl. Education had become efficient but uninspiring, standardized across continents, optimized for what the global economy needed rather than what young minds craved. "Rika," Lin called out, her voice echoing in the empty classroom. Rika Wong had been raising her hand, about to ask a question when the golden light enveloped her. Now, only a half-written equation remained on her tablet. Lin rushed to the window. All across the school grounds, teachers stood bewildered in doorways. The elementary playground, usually alive with squealing children, lay deserted with swings still in motion. In the distance, she could hear screams, the wail of emergency vehicles, the beginning of chaos. She pulled out her communication device. "Headmaster Chan, the children." "I know," came the terse reply. "All of them. Everywhere." By evening, it was confirmed. Every child on Earth between 5 and 15 years old had disappeared simultaneously. The planetary child napping, as media outlets called it, had occurred with surgical precision. Infants and toddlers remained untouched. 16-year-olds were spared. But the core of Earth's young population, 1.7 billion developing minds, had vanished in what would later be calculated as exactly 12 minutes and 7 seconds. Lin sat alone in her apartment that night, watching as the world dissolved into panic. Parents collapsed in grief on live broadcasts, religious leaders proclaimed judgment, military forces mobilized against an enemy they couldn't identify, and governments fumbled for answers they didn't have. "Where are they?" she whispered to herself, staring at the night sky through her window. "And why?" The stars offered no reply, but Lin couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was listening. 5 days after the mass disappearance, with global markets in freefall and martial law declared in 17 countries, the International Education Consortium made a stunning announcement that instantly polarized the world. In a press release disseminated in every language, they claimed the children were participating in an automated universal learning module orchestrated by an advanced intelligence. "We have reason to believe," stated Dr. Eliza Janssen, the consortium's Secretary General, "that this is not an attack but an educational intervention. Initial data suggests the children are safe and engaged in accelerated learning." Lin watched the broadcast with mounting skepticism. The consortium, a powerful body that standardized educational protocols globally, had always promoted technological solutions to human problems. Their statement smacked of opportunism, or worse, collusion. "This is absurd," she muttered, sending a message to her colleague, Raj Patel. "They have no evidence. They're just trying to prevent mass hysteria." Raj's reply came seconds later. "Or they know something we don't. Meet me in the quantum lab. Midnight." Lin had once been an AI programmer before switching careers to education. She understood data patterns better than most. And the patterns emerging didn't add up to an educational intervention. They looked like a calculated invasion. That night, under the pretense of retrieving personal items, Lin entered the deserted school campus, The quantum physics lab, usually bustling with student experiments, felt eerie in its emptiness. Raj was already there, his face illuminated by multiple screens. "Look at this," he said without greeting. "Atmospheric readings from the day of the disappearance." Lynn studied the data, unusual radiation patterns, gravitational anomalies, and, most importantly, signal transmissions that didn't match any known human technology. "They're communicating," she whispered. "With whom?" "Not whom," Raj corrected. "With what? The signals are being received by the children's neural implants. Like most people born after 2120, all students had standard neural enhancement implants, tiny quantum processors that facilitated learning and information processing. Originally designed to help humans keep pace with AI, they had become as common as vaccination. "You think whatever took them is teaching them?" Lynn asked incredulously. "I think," Raj said carefully, "that we're witnessing first contact disguised as a parent-teacher conference." By the second week, society had fractured into 3 distinct camps. Those who believed the consortium's increasingly elaborate educational exchange narrative. Those convinced a hostile alien force had captured Earth's children for nefarious purposes. And a growing soft resistance movement, primarily educators and child development specialists who suspected something in between. Lynn found herself drawn to this third group, attending clandestine meetings where teachers, child psychologists, and concerned parents analyzed the strange transmissions now regularly detected across the planet. "They're teaching patterns," said Dr. Amara Okafor, a linguist specializing in cognitive development. "But not in any language we recognize. These are thought structures, pure conceptual frameworks being transmitted directly to neural tissue." "Can we interpret them?" asked a father whose twins had disappeared. "We're trying," Amara replied, "but it's like trying to read a book written in the language of birds. We lack the fundamental reference points." Len thought of Rika, her brightest student, who struggled with traditional learning methods but showed flashes of brilliant intuition. "What if we're approaching this backward?" she suggested. "Instead of trying to understand their teaching methods, what if we try to understand what they find lacking in ours?" The room fell silent as her words sank in. "You think this is remedial education?" someone finally asked. "For us?" "No," Lynn said, her mind racing. "For our children, someone, something, has decided our educational system is insufficient." As protests erupted globally, and military forces monitored the skies for any sign of the mysterious abductors, Lynn and the soft resistance began a different kind of observation. They analyzed the patterns of human education over centuries, looking for what might appear as deficiencies to an advanced intelligence. "We standardize," Lynn noted during one late-night session. "We quantify learning. We treat knowledge as linear when evidence suggests consciousness develops in spirals. We prioritize conformity over creativity," added another teacher. "And we've separated education from direct experience," said a third. While governments erected planetary defense systems and parents held vigils, Lynn's group made a breakthrough. They detected return signals from the children's neural implants, faint but unmistakable patterns indicating communication from the abducted to their abductors. "They're responding," Lynn realized with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "The children are engaged in dialogue." 20 days after the disappearance, just as global stability teetered on the brink, it happened. The children began returning, not all at once, but in small groups that materialized in the same golden spirals that had taken them. First came a cluster of 7-year-olds in Nairobi, then 9-year-olds in Buenos Aires, followed by teenagers in Oslo. By day's end, nearly 10,000 children had returned, each appearing precisely where they had vanished 3 weeks earlier. Among the first in Singapore was Rika Wong. Lynn was summoned to the school immediately, arriving to find Rika sitting calmly in the same classroom where she'd disappeared, finishing the equation she had started 3 weeks ago. But there was something different about her. A stillness, a focus that hadn't been there before. "Rika?" Lynn approached cautiously as government officials and medical personnel hovered nearby. The girl looked up, her eyes clear and somehow older. "Teacher Lynn," she said, her voice unchanged yet carrying a new cadence. "The Mentari say hello." "The Mentari?" "Our teachers," Rika explained simply. "They asked me to come back first because you're asking the right questions." Within hours, similar scenes played out across the globe. Returned children, showing no signs of trauma or distress. Speaking of the Mentari and carrying knowledge that defied their previous educational levels. A 6-year-old in Mexico could suddenly read in 17 languages. A group of 10-year-olds in Bangladesh collectively solved mathematical problems that had stumped adult theorists for decades. And every child, without exception, asked the same question: why do you teach us so little of what matters? As medical examinations confirmed, the children were healthy, improved. Even with enhanced neural connectivity and immune function, the narrative shifted. These were not victims but ambassadors, not abductees but exchange students. And they had a message. The Mentari believe humans have stagnated, Rika explained to Lynn during a debriefing session that felt more like a reversal of their teacher-student roles. They say we've created educational systems that process children rather than ignite them. "Who are they?" Lynn asked, trying to maintain her composure as Rika casually sketched a perfect model of 11-dimensional space on her tablet. "They're educators," Rika said simply. "From a civilization about 7,000 years ahead of ours. They specialize in identifying developing species that have reached educational plateaus. And they just take children without permission?" Rika tilted her head, considering. "Would you have given permission? Would anyone?" Before Lynn could answer, Marcus Tang, Singapore's education minister, entered the room flanked by security personnel. His normally composed demeanor had given way to barely contained excitement. "Rika," he said, ignoring Lynn entirely. "I understand you've brought back information about advanced quantum computing principles." The girl nodded. "Excellent. You'll be transferred to the Central Research Facility immediately. The government has established a special program for returning children with valuable knowledge." Lynn stepped forward. "Minister Tang, Rika has only just returned. She needs time to readjust, to be with her family." "What she needs," Tang cut in sharply, "is to share what she's learned for the benefit of Singapore. National security concerns outweigh sentimentality. Teacher Nguyen." As Rika was led away, she looked back at Lynn with an expression that conveyed both apology and certainty. "The Mentari said this would happen," she murmured. "They said adults would try to own what we've learned instead of learning alongside us." By the end of the first week, nearly half of Earth's missing children had returned, and a pattern had emerged. Each came back transformed, carrying knowledge far beyond their years, but also asking uncomfortable questions about human society, education, and consciousness itself. Governments scrambled to debrief and contain them. Parents alternated between joy at their children's return and bewilderment at the changes. And educators like Lynn found themselves caught in the middle of an unprecedented philosophical crisis. What happens when the students suddenly know more than their teachers? In Singapore, Marcus Tang quickly established the Advanced Knowledge Integration Program, effectively sequestering returned children in specialized facilities where their new knowledge could be properly channeled for national advantage. Similar programs appeared across the globe, turning children into assets in an emerging knowledge race. Lynn, increasingly alarmed by these developments, joined a growing coalition of educators advocating for the children's autonomy. They called themselves The Bridge, dedicated to understanding rather than exploiting the transformation. "We're treating them like mines to be excavated," she argued during a contentious faculty meeting. "These are children, not resources." "These are national assets," countered Headmaster Chan. Every bit of knowledge they've brought back could advance Singapore by decades. Would you have us fall behind while other nations capitalize on this opportunity? I would have us ask why an advanced civilization chose to educate our children directly. Lin replied, and what that says about our own approach to education? That evening, as Lin reviewed research on the returning children, her communication device pinged with an encrypted message. The Mentari wish to speak with you. Tomorrow, Botanic Gardens, midnight. The sender was listed simply as R. Rika. The Singapore Botanic Gardens at midnight were technically closed to the public, but Lin knew the old service entrance that gardeners used. Her heart pounded as she slipped through the shadows, past ancient trees and slumbering orchids, to the designated meeting spot near the Evolution Garden. She found Rika sitting cross-legged on a bench, drawing complex patterns in the air with her fingertips, patterns that somehow left luminescent trails that hung suspended before slowly fading. They taught us to visualize in higher dimensions, Rika explained without preamble. It helps with complex thinking. Lin sat beside her former student. You said the Mentari want to speak with me. They do. Rika turned to face her. But first, you should know what they are. The Mentari, Rika explained, were not precisely aliens in the way humans imagined them. They were an ancient species that had evolved beyond physical form into patterns of conscious energy, specializing in the development of emerging intelligent species across the galaxy. They're teachers, Rika said simply, the best in the galaxy, and they've identified Earth as a planet in educational crisis. Crisis, Lin echoed. We have universal education, adaptive learning algorithms, neural enhancement. You have processing plants, Rika interrupted, her voice suddenly carrying the weight of something older than her 14 years. You take vibrant, curious minds and standardize them until they can perform economic functions. The Mentari found that concerning. Before Lin could defend human educational practices, the air between them shimmered. The garden around them seemed to recede as points of light coalesced into a gently pulsing sphere that hovered at eye level. This is a projection, Rika explained. The Mentari can't fully manifest in our dimension, but they can communicate through calibrated quantum fluctuations. The sphere pulsed, and Lin felt rather than heard words forming directly in her mind. We greet you, Teacher Lin Wen. We apologize for the distress our intervention has caused. The voice was neither male nor female, young nor old. It simply was, carrying an impression of vast patience and ancient wisdom. You took our children, Lin said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. We educated your children, as you attempted to do, but with methods better suited to their potential. Without consent. Would a species that has convinced itself that standardization equals education have consented to a fundamental paradigm shift? Lin had no immediate answer. Your children learned more in 21 days than your systems would have taught them in 15 years. Not because we are better teachers, but because we teach what consciousness craves rather than what economies demand. And now, Lin asked, now that you've demonstrated our inadequacy, what happens? The sphere pulsed more intensely. Phase 2 begins. All children will return within 7 days. They bring with them the foundation for a new educational framework, one that honors the spiral nature of consciousness rather than forcing linear progression. And if we reject this framework, that is your choice. But the children will not unlearn what they have learned. The question is whether adults will choose to evolve alongside them or create a schism between generations that may never heal. As the meeting concluded and the Mentari presence faded, leaving only Lin and Rika in the moonlit garden, the teacher found herself facing the greatest challenge of her career: how to bridge the gap between what humanity had always done and what it might become. They want you to be their human liaison, Rika said as they walked back through the silent gardens. They say you understand both worlds, the technological and the human. Why me? Because you asked, why they took us, not what we learned. Rika smiled. That's the difference between a teacher and a knowledge extractor. By the time all children had returned, exactly 21 days after their disappearance, Earth had transformed. Governments vacillated between treating the event as a blessing and a threat. Industries scrambled to incorporate the advanced concepts some children had brought back. And parents worldwide struggled with a new reality. Their children had been changed in ways both wondrous and unsettling. The returned children displayed not only accelerated academic knowledge, but profound philosophical awareness. They discussed consciousness as easily as they once talked about video games. They asked questions about purpose, ethics, and the nature of reality that left adults stammering. And they began teaching each other. Across playgrounds and through neural networks, the children shared what they had learned from the Mentari. Some specialized in mathematical concepts, others in linguistics or arts that defied traditional categories. Together, they formed a kind of distributed intelligence, collectively holding knowledge that no single human mind could contain. Marcus Tang and leaders like him saw this as both opportunity and threat. These children represent Singapore's future competitive advantage, he declared during an emergency cabinet meeting. We must implement structured programs to harvest this knowledge before other nations surpass us. The word harvest made Lynn flinch as she watched the broadcast. It was the same mindset that had reduced education to economic utility, the very approach the Mentari had identified as stunting human potential. When the Mentari communication came, this time through official channels, detected by government agencies worldwide, humanity faced its moment of truth. The message, simultaneously broadcast to every neural implant and communication device on the planet, was simple. We offer continuation of the Universal Learning Module for all children who wish to participate. Adults may observe but not interfere. The choice belongs to each child. The reaction was immediate and polarizing. Many parents, terrified of losing their children again or having them further altered, demanded government intervention to block the alien influence. Others, seeing the remarkable growth in their returned children, advocated for accepting the offer. World leaders convened an emergency United Nations session to formulate a unified response. Lin, as the established human intermediary to the Mentari, was summoned to address the assembly. Standing before representatives of every nation, cameras broadcasting her words to billions. Lin felt the weight of the moment. This was not just about education anymore. It was about humanity's relationship with a universe apparently full of intelligences beyond their own. The Mentari have shown us something we've long suspected but refused to acknowledge, she began. Our educational systems prepare children for the world we've built, not for the minds they possess. We teach them to fit into our structures rather than helping them create new ones. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. I've spoken extensively with the returned children and with the Mentari themselves. Their methods aren't magic. They simply honor the natural development of consciousness without imposing artificial limitations. Marcus Tang, representing Singapore, rose to speak. Teacher Nguyen glosses over the security implications. These aliens, yes, aliens, let's call them what they are, have demonstrated the ability to remove 1.7 billion humans from Earth without our consent or ability to prevent it. Now they wish ongoing access to our children's minds. How is this not an existential threat to human autonomy? Applause followed his words. Lin nodded acknowledgement. Minister Tang raises valid concerns about consent and security. But consider this. The Mentari could have simply reprogrammed our children if domination were their goal. Instead, they educated them and sent them back with a choice. She paused, looking around the chamber. The fundamental question isn't whether we should allow or forbid this contact. The question is, who has the right to decide? The governments who have standardized education into efficient but joyless processing? The parents who love their children but often prepare them for yesterday's world? Or the children themselves, who must live in the future we cannot imagine? The debate raged for days. Nations threatened military action against an enemy they couldn't locate. Parents formed both resistance and advocacy groups, and through it all, the children watched with a patience that seemed eerily adult. On the 7th day of deliberations, as the UN prepared to vote on a resolution prohibiting further alien educational contact, the children intervened. It began with Rika Wong, standing before the Singapore delegation with a proposal. Let us decide our own educational future. Similar scenes played out across the assembly as children approached their national representatives with the same message, delivered with calm certainty that belied their years. We propose a global referendum, announced a 12-year-old French boy, conducted among all children between 5 and 15. We will decide whether to continue learning with the Mentari, with full transparency for our parents and teachers. The audacity of the proposal, children voting on their own educational destiny, initially met with dismissal. But as the day progressed, something unprecedented occurred. The children began demonstrating what they had learned. A group of 8-year-olds presented a unified theory of quantum gravity that had eluded physicists for centuries. Teenagers from Kenya unveiled an atmospheric carbon capture system built from commonly available materials. Children from Brazil demonstrated a new form of mathematics that could model ecological systems with perfect accuracy. This is what 21 days with the Mentari taught us, Rika explained to the stunned assembly. Imagine what we might learn, what we might create, with ongoing access to their methods. The adults found themselves at a crossroads unlike any in human history. Acknowledge that children might make better decisions about their own development than adults had, or enforce authority over a generation that had intellectually surpassed them. In a surprise move, Lin proposed a compromise. A dual educational system, traditional human education available to all, Mentari methods available to those who choose it, with ongoing research into integrating the best of both approaches. The vote, when it came, was narrow but clear. Children would be given the choice. With parental observation rights guaranteed and a joint human Mentari oversight committee established to ensure ethical implementation. What followed became known as the co-creation era. Children who chose Mentari education, roughly 70% globally, continued to live with their families but spent part of each day in direct neural communion with their alien teachers. The remaining 30% continued with traditional education, though even this was transformed by insights from the Mentari approach. Lin Nguyen found herself appointed as the first interplanetary educational liaison, a teacher of teachers who worked to build bridges between human educational traditions and the consciousness-centered approach of the Mentari. The transition wasn't seamless. Some parents never reconciled with the changes in their children. Some governments attempted to weaponize the knowledge gained. But the children themselves proved to be the stabilizing force, neither fully Mentari nor traditionally human. They created a third path that honored both heritages while transcending their limitations. 5 years after the initial abduction, Rika Wong, now 19 and a leading researcher in consciousness studies, invited her former teacher to observe a new development. The first generation of dual-educated humans is ready to become teachers themselves, she explained, leading Lin through a facility where teenagers worked with younger children in learning environments that seamlessly blended physical and mental dimensions. They're teaching consciousness mapping to 7-year-olds, Lin observed, watching as children learn to externalize their thought patterns in visible, interactive forms. The Mentari believe consciousness is the fundamental building block of reality, Rika explained. Once you understand how consciousness shapes perception, all other learning follows naturally. And the children understand this better than adults. They haven't yet learned to separate their minds from their experience. As they watched, a young boy constructed an elaborate thought structure that illustrated a mathematical concept through pure conceptual architecture. No numbers, no equations, just the essence of the relationship made visible. Beautiful, Lin murmured. This is just the beginning, Rika said. The Mentari have identified 12,000 developing civilizations across our galaxy alone. Earth is now considered a possible future teacher world, a planet that might someday help guide other emerging intelligences. Lynn considered this with wonder. From students to teachers in a single generation. Isn't that always the goal? Rika smiled. The best students always surpass their teachers. The Mentari say that's how the universe learns about itself. As they left the facility, stepping into the evening air, Lynn looked up at the stars with new understanding. The universe was not the cold, empty void humans had long imagined, but a vast interconnected classroom where consciousness itself was both student and teacher. The children who had once been abducted now stood at the threshold of a future their parents could never have imagined for them, not as passive inheritors of human knowledge, but as active co-creators of a wisdom that transcended planetary boundaries. And in this transition, Lynn found the answer to the question that had haunted her since that first day when golden light had emptied her classroom. The children had not been taken from humanity, but for humanity, to break the cycle of limited thinking that had kept Earth isolated in a universe teeming with thought. The greatest lesson of the Mentari, it turned out, was not the advanced knowledge they imparted, but something far simpler and more profound. True education was not about filling minds with information, but about connecting minds to the infinite possibilities that consciousness itself contained. As a new generation of Earth children prepared to become teachers to the stars, humanity finally understood what the Mentari had known all along, that the greatest classroom was not bound by walls or planets or species, but existed wherever minds opened to the wonder of their own potential. Ready for tomorrow? Rika asked as they paused at the crossroads where their paths would diverge. Lynn nodded, thinking of her new role helping adults understand the transformed children in their midst. "I'm still learning," she said. "We all are." "That," said Rika, with the wisdom of both a child and something far older, "is the point